So this video kind of relates to some of the recent videos I've been uploading. I know there's been some sound issues, but I think the problem's resolved now, so apologies about that. I made a video about hazing and bullying in the military and the armed forces and the emergency services. Unfortunately, that was one of the ones that had no sound. I'm not going to re-upload that. This one is related to the subject matter, which is how do we differentiate between bullying slash abuse versus banter in inverted commas? Um, Now, I have a very clear idea what I think of this, but obviously not everyone will agree. Um, so let me break it down a bit how I see this. I mean, this relates to the whole thing about masculinity and, laddish banter. So it could be a group of guys in a pub and they're taking the piss out of one of their mates because he's supposedly a virgin, something like that. And it's usually young men, but it can be older men as well. Not necessarily about that issue, but just in general. I think there is a problem in the armed forces and in the emergency services with this sort of situation, this dynamic. But anyway, I won't get into that for this video. I've spoken about it before. Bullying is quite a broad term, and it is one of those terms, like racism or sexism, that can be a bit abstract. What is bullying to one person might just be harmless banter to another. But the way I see it is, and the approach I take, is that if someone is uncomfortable, then it no longer is an issue of, oh, they should just lighten up. It becomes an issue of just have some respect and cut it. Yes, there are overly sensitive people out there, and yes, we have this whole thing about so-called snowflakes. It's not a term I use, although I appreciate where it comes from. People who look for reasons to be offended, people who are overly sensitive. So I do think there is a phenomenon with that as well. But I've had a lot of experience in my life with some pretty unpleasant situations, um, with bullying, with crime. So I certainly haven't been sheltered in that sense. I've had some pretty unpleasant first-hand experiences, and those sort of experiences really do leave a strong sense of right and wrong in this subject area. Um, one thing I've never understood is people who cannot leave other people alone. They cannot seem to, someone walks past them on the street and they just have to shout something out. They just have to shout out some insult or some provocation. Um, it's really something I have no respect for. And I really, really look down on such people. It's almost like they're just looking for confrontation. And the thing is, they don't know who they're dealing with because one person may move on, another person may suffer from anxiety and that would affect them greatly. And the third person, they may find that they're messing with the wrong person, has a very quick temper, and then a fight breaks out. And in the worst case scenario, really bad things can happen. So my whole life I've had contempt for those sort of people that just start, to put it bluntly, start shit with strangers for absolutely no reason. I'm not talking about if they're legitimately upset about something. For example, they feel that that person has done something wrong, or they feel that maybe they're defending someone else, or there's some sort of context to confronting a person. But people who do it because they think it's fun or they think it's a laugh, I really, they disgust me. And I would say, personally speaking, I've got a good degree of self control, but I'm not going to lie, I am also not the sort of person to sort of, water over or water under the bridge. My logic is what the hell gives them a right to think they can say that to me? And my thinking is they see me as an easy target. So perhaps my male ego comes into that. I mean, I'm not the sort of person to get into a fist fight, but yeah, I admit my male ego comes into that. Like, how dare they think that I'm vulnerable? How dare they think that I'm a soft target? So more often than not, I will answer back. I'll demand to know what they've said or something like that. And people might say that's reckless, but in the end of the day, people like this think they can get away with it. They think that they can just insult strangers and that's okay. Obviously, it's practical to judge each situation on its own merit, and there's times when you have to swallow your pride and not be reckless. If it means walking on, that's sometimes the preferable option. But I hate such people, and they range a lot. They're usually young men, but they can be older guys, and they can sometimes be women as well. Now, in the case of women, obviously, it isn't going to get into physical altercation most of the time. But yeah, I mean, what sort of people are they that need to start a confrontation with a stranger for no other reason than they think it's a laugh? Someone suffering from anxiety. I have a close friend and he suffers greatly from anxiety. He has to take medication for it. If a stranger shouts out abuse at him, that would greatly affect him. Now, with me, it would affect me in that it would piss me off. Wouldn't necessarily make me anxious or scared, but it would piss me off. With my friend, it would definitely make him very anxious. Um, so really, there's people like this need to be put in their place. And I think if everyone takes the attitude of, or just move on, then they'll continue doing it. That's how I see it. But anyway, I don't mean to digress. Bullying is a term that is somewhat, it's a little bit contentious because it kind of insinuates that if you are a victim of bullying, then you're a victim. So in some ways, I prefer to use the term giving someone hassle. Now, I'm not saying bullying doesn't exist, by the way. I'm not downplaying it. It definitely exists. And it exists in schools, it exists in offices, it exists, unfortunately, it's a widespread problem. And I've dealt with it. It's a horrible thing. But, the Hollywood depiction of bullying is very false because the kind of popular culture image of a bully is usually a big guy. It's kind of like, Biff in the Back to the Future series. He's kind of a comic book bully. The truth of the matter is, the worst sort of bullies are usually not acting as individuals. Okay, he has this kind of henchmen, but what I find is the worst sort of bullies actually tend to act as groups. And individually, they're not necessarily overbearing or big individuals. I really hate this idea that bullies are all always older or bigger than their victims. You can have, for example, bullies who are younger than their victims. Um, there's a scene in the film Dangerous Minds. It always irritated me. I like the film, but it's a bit where Michelle Pfeiffer kind of reprimands the kind of tough kid in the film, and she's, "You're older and you're stronger than these two put together," as if that's a premise for right and wrong. You know, rather than looking at it as, well, who started this situation and what is the context. Coming from a teaching background, if I ever had a situation of bullying, I didn't really have to deal with that. But if I ever did, I always took the view of trying to get to the context of what happened here, trying to understand, if a particular student is being given a hard time, and then, tracing that problem and dealing with it. We shouldn't take this attitude that just because the target is physically bigger or older, then somehow it's fine. The truth of the matter is, bullies can be big or small, they can be male or female, and they're universally um, despicable. But I think the worst kinds of bullies are kind of groups that target an individual. That's why I think we need to have a change. And I don't mean to go off on a tangent here, but when it comes to crime, we need to start looking at crime as actually a form of bullying. The victims of crime, whether it be a young family harassed by yobs or, you know, a young man in London or Birmingham being pressured to join a gang, criminals are bullies. I think if we look at it from that point of view, we would have a different approach in terms of how to deal with it. Because as it stands, crime is looked at as kind of, oh, well, it's because of poverty, it's because of a bad background, it's because of X, Y, and Z. So we look at bullying and crime in a different light, yet they're fundamentally pretty similar in the sense they're targeting innocent people. So I really think that when it comes to masculinity, young men need to be taught that the worst sort of cowardice is to hide behind a group or a gang. It's not a case of being overly sensitive. It's not a case of not having a laugh. Clearly, a group of guys together having beers, jokes are flying. I think that's generally harmless. I don't have an issue with it. The problem becomes when it's targeted at an individual constantly. So let's say group of friends, it's always targeted at the same person. That to me is when it transcends from banter to just outright wearing someone down, and it's the sort of thing that can drive people over the edge. Really is. I mean, this might be a controversial thing to say, but the West Cumbria shootings back in 2010, there were reports going around that the shooter Derek Bird had been picked on by some of his fellow taxi drivers. Now, who knows what the truth is? It may or may not be true. But if that is true, then it may well be a case that he was pushed over the edge. It's no excuse for what he done. He committed a horrendous atrocity and he killed a lot of innocent people. But if it had been a case that he'd been worn down over months and months and months, it's no wonder he snapped. I'm not saying that's what happened. I'm saying that there were reports at the time suggesting that may have been one factor. So people who think it's just banter to wear someone down do not know the sort of damage that they're doing. So they need to really be challenged, put on the spot. Um, so yeah, I hate bullies and I hate that sort of attitude of just wearing someone down, of constantly targeting the same person. And it's all very well saying, oh, if they just have a sense of humor, it won't happen. But they can try that approach and they're already pigeonholed as the soft target, as the person to take the piss out of. So if they do take a different attitude, that doesn't necessarily work. If they try to laugh it off, the bullies continue. And I think it's a pretty disgusting form of victim bullying, actually. Excuse me, victim blaming. It's on my words there, victim blaming. So it's important not to always, lose their tempers. But I don't understand people that want to give others a hard time for absolutely no reason. I mean, I was walking Sunderland City Centre recently, and some guy mutters something as he's walking past me, kind of like taken back. I'm like, what did he just say? Was that to me? And then he mouthed something off, like, what are you looking at? Or something like that. And, it could be a case that there are some people, they take out their frustrations on others. So maybe they're having a long day or something. But the way I see it is there's really no excuse for abusing strangers. And I would say this as well, just extending this a little bit. When we talk about hate crime, when we talk about the issues around that, it's very important that we don't that people are not arrested or police aren't divulging resources into hurt feelings. However, there is a real problem in this country. Anyone that thinks there is no racism in Britain today is deluded. There is a problem with racism, and there are thugs out there who think it's perfectly okay to lay into total strangers. Like that guy on the London Underground recently, the Muslim lady stood up for the the guy that laid into the Jewish man. So, whatever the excuses might be used for him, he has mental health problems or whatever. I think that there has to be a certain issue of right and wrong. And you get these pricks that they've had a few beers, they're in a group with their mates, and they think that they own the place, they think they can throw the weight around. They're absolute dickheads. And they're like a walking cliche. And they represent the worst of masculinity. So, what I would say to people who say masculinity is a bad thing, I would say don't judge men by dickheads like that. That's what I call them. I look down on them. I really, it's like when you get on a train and you're traveling somewhere. I found this is a particular problem between Carlisle and Dumfries. You get idiots who get on and they've had a lot of booze and they just take over the place. They just throw their weight around. I mean, actually, I went to the toilet and I came back and someone had left a flipping kebab on my seat. But I'm not saying they were necessarily trying to wind me up, but it's just this selfish indifference. Oh, well, someone else will do it. Someone else will sort it out. There's too many selfish pricks out there that just, I must admit, it does anger me. But with that comes the necessity for self control. Because if you let these people get to you, you'll go crazy. It's not my fault. It's not the fault of anyone else who has to put up with them. But, it's a problem. And racist abuse is absolutely disgusting. I favour custodial sentencing actually for, really gratuitous cases. Absolutely custodial sentencing. And I think people who, they hide behind alcohol because they were drunk. No, no way. That's another thing that angers me. Don't make excuses. Don't say, oh, they have a drinking problem, so that excuses them abusing a total stranger. If they've got alcoholism, it's their responsibility to get it sorted out, to get rehab. If they can't handle the booze, and they're not necessarily an alcoholic, but they can't handle the booze, they shouldn't be drinking. I'm so tired of excuses being made for these people. I do think there should be zero tolerance with drunkenness on public transport because the rest of us shouldn't have to put up with that crap. I mean, this is something that really, I think, isn't explored. When we talk about mental health, when we talk about happiness of a nation, quality of life standards, people who ruin it for others need to face consequences, whether it be jobs, hassling people, or just selfish idiots getting drunk on public transport and throwing their weight around. And often it is guys, but women aren't incapable of this either. You get an outrageous hen party, they're just as bad. And actually, for the authorities, that's even more testy because then there's the double thing of if they apprehend them, then they can be accused of something. So, the disgusting ladette culture that we have in this country is just as much of a problem. Anyway, I'll wrap it up there. I really feel nothing but contempt for these people who cannot leave others alone. So that's my take of the difference between banter and abuse.